Today we have a very interesting topic. I'm here with historian More Altshuler. So in a sense, this is More interviewing More, and she's a historian, and I'm going to talk to her about the mentality that needs to be discussed about the Arab-Palestinian culture. So the title we chose is Look Satan in the Eye.
After 7, you know what happened here in Simchat Torah, the massacre, I decided that I no longer have the privilege to look away from the satanic nature of both the Nazis and the Palestinians, but you can go to the other Muslims as well, and really look Satan in the eye and admit that we are not just dealing with bad people with bad intentions, but they have a plan to destroy, exterminate the entire Jewish people, and that is of a satanic nature.
But would it be fair to say, More, that there has been a reluctance in general, in the media, in academia, but perhaps more pointedly, there has been a reluctance in Israeli politics to frankly face this particular circumstance, the nature of the culture of the Muslims and the Arab Palestinians in this area?
Yes. I think we Jews are afraid to look Satan in the eyes because we believe in God and we believe in people being the image of God, mankind being the image of God. And any other message is it's heartbreaking for us. Mm-hmm. But some Israelis went, and American Jews as well, went beyond just ignoring the satanic or the nature of both Nazis and Palestinians. They even turned things upside down and blamed Israel for being, the continuation of the Nazi regime and the Nazi plans. Here, Jews in Israel supposedly do to the Arabs what the Nazis tried and did to the Jews. And I think this is, how can I say, Francesco, maybe you from an outside point of view would define it.
I think it's the word for that is Orwellian. So George Orwell taught us that when we are being oppressed by a totalitarian ruling elite, we should expect that ruling elite to invert precisely the meanings of all the important political words. So in his novel 1984, the one party that dominated everything had a slogan, and the slogan was, "War is peace, freedom is slavery, ignorance is strength." Okay, so every single word that is important for political thought has its meaning inverted precisely. So this is what we're seeing. So here we're saying, war is peace, freedom is slavery, ignorance is strength, Jews are Nazis. You see, so you invert absolutely every word precisely.
Yes, a lie is truth and truth is lie. First there's no truth and then lie. Any lie can be truth. Well, there are some great Israeli poets that said it already in the 30s and in the 40s. Berl Katzenelson and then Natan Alterman. These are well-known poets and thinkers in Israel, and they said, how come that there are Jews that embrace every bad thinking about their own people, the Jewish people, and their own fellow brothers and sisters, while sanctifying the Palestinians and calling us Nazis and sanctifying the Palestinians to be the victims. The Palestinians are supposedly to be, the Jews of the world, the victims of Jewish brutality. And that leads us to even today. Even today, and we see General Yair Golan and others claiming that Israel is on the way to be the new Nazi nation, while the Palestinians suffer, the poor victims suffer under our boots.
Are you saying an Israeli general said that?
Well, it's well known to Israeli audience, of course, and Israeli philosophers like Yeshayahu Leibowitz in the 70s, and even today they are still saying, a woman in Be'eri which was attacked by Hamas and had to stay in the shelter with her daughter, and the daughter was afraid. And she asked mother, what shall we do if they come, if Hamas come? And she said, we are going to say that we are the good ones, so they will let us live.
Interesting.
There are good Jews and bad Jews. The bad Jews, of course, are the settlers and those who want all Palestine to be Jewish and so on. Jews are the new Nazis, yes.
An obvious question would be, if you're not an anti-Semite, right, an obvious question would be, well, why are the people who have influence in Israel behaving this way? Why are generals and the media, because when you look at the media is almost uniformly anti-Israeli. So the major media in Israel, you never see them making strong arguments for defending the Jews. They're always making the opposite argument. And they're always criticizing the government if the government is actually fighting the jihadis. So wouldn't this suggest that somehow the enemy has taken control of Israeli institutions?
Taking control of the minds of the Jews. Jews feel so guilty for being different than others. So the only way we can, please the others and make the Arabs love us is by denying our own identity, taking the blame for their supposedly suffering, and be the victim, in Christian terms, it's the lamb. Jesus is the lamb of the world that should be sacrificed. There are Israelis willing to sacrifice our own lives to be friended with our attackers. And I think that's a very bad illness.
Okay, so
Francesco, I wanted to say that it goes back to the days of the War of Independence, and even before that, to the riots in 1929. Now, you might not be aware that many Israelis come from families of newcomers. They don't know the history of the Palestinian murderous nature, and therefore it is easier for them to ignore it. But I come from a very old family in Israel. My ancestors arrived here at 1777. So there is some kind of family memory that goes from one generation to the other about the atrocities of the Palestinians, even before the Zionist movement.
You've written about this, so I wanted to ask you, could you give us some examples of the memory in your family of what happened in the 1929 riots and also in the War of 1948? I know a little bit about this because I read Uri Milstein's history of the War of Independence, and I remember being very shocked when I read his work, because it turns out that Israeli soldiers were given grenades and instructed that if they were caught behind enemy lines and it was obvious that they were going to be captured and there was no possibility of rescuing them, then they should blow themselves up, because if they were captured alive, the Arabs would torture them to death. That was the let us say, the rules of engagement on the Arab side was that any Jewish prisoners would be tortured to death. So they had this policy to give them all grenades and instruct them to kill themselves if there was no way to rescue them. You have mentioned some of them in your writing. Can you share that with
Yes.
with our audience?
I'll share two examples. I wrote them in an article that is published in the JNS website. And I wrote just really few examples. One example is one of my father's cousin, Gershon Gera, was one day handed a box with pictures. It was given to him anonymously, just left by his door. And when he opened the box, it was uncensored pictures of the massacre of the Jews of Hebron in 1929. And uncensored pictures that were never shown to us children, to me as a child, never spoken about. We only saw really few pictures and they were censored. And the pictures show a horrible, I'll just crushed skulls, mutilated bodies, eyes taken from the scalp, hands cut off while alive, and other horrible atrocities that the Arabs committed on the bodies of the Jews. These pictures are only in the Jewish Museum in Hebron. No other official website would show them. And of course, they are not taught at school. Children in Israel don't know these truths. And then...
Okay, but I wanted to ask you about that because we were just discussing a second ago that most of the Israeli institutions seem to behave in ways that are designed to make it difficult for Israeli Jews to defend themselves.
Yes.
And I suggested that if you're looking at this as an observer, but it seems one obvious hypothesis is that the enemy has taken over Israeli institutions. Now you're saying that even education is designed so that the Israeli Jews will not know the nature of their enemy. Is that correct?
Exactly. Listen, as a child, I never heard from my father, who was a soldier in the days of independence, what really happened. But I did hear from my teacher. Her brother was killed in the beginning of the war. And she said, and she told, and only now, she's a very old woman now, she tells the truth, how the bodies were mutilated and destroyed with just a joy, with just a joy. And I wrote it, designated bodies, hands cut off, eyes taken off, and so on. And this is what happened to her brother, whose body, by the way, was never found. My husband's family, my husband is named after his uncle, Zion, who was killed at the beginning of the War of Independence. And again, the situation of the bodies, when 6 bodies arrived, burned and mutilated to Rehovot, his father could not identify his young brother, and so couldn't the others. So they were buried together, 6 Jewish soldiers. These atrocities happened again and again. Jewish women were raped in the War of Independence, but no one talked about it. It seems that they didn't want to break the spirit of the young Israelis that were supposed to be soldiers again, as they grow up. I don't know why they did it, but they kept silence for years. It's like Jews after the Holocaust that kept silence about what happened in the Holocaust and talked only after 40 years.
I think there's a difference between a Holocaust survivor who doesn't want to share the experiences because they're too painful and an educational system that hides the nature of the enemy from the Israeli Jews, because the same Israeli institutions that designed the educational system in this manner also asked the Israeli Jews to believe that PLO Fatah was going to abandon terrorism in exchange for territory, right? So it's not, if the hypothesis is, we're trying to not break the spirit of the young Israelis who are building the country, etc. Okay, that's one argument. But that doesn't allow you to, or that doesn't get you an explanation for why would they then try to sell the Israelis on the argument that they can live in peace with these people who are torturing Israelis to death and murdering them and mutilating their bodies and so on and so forth, and doing it joyously. So the question is, it seems to me that the hypothesis, I'm trying not to break their spirit, that could be plausible if all you have is evidence of not discussing the atrocities. But if you pair that with the fact that the people running the institutions in Israel created an entire diplomatic process to bring PLO Fatah into Judea, Samaria, and Gaza, that begins to look like something more nefarious.
Listen, what started as a naive, maybe, thinking of let's ignore it, not to break the spirit of our young ones, was, manipulated, very easily manipulated into the thinking of let's, present ourselves, the Jews in Israel, as the true aggressors, and make it kosher, legitimize the enemy so we can make peace. It was very carefully and very easily manipulated. And of course, they all take take it for granted that many Israelis whose parents were not born in Israel, whose family does not go back so many years ago, would not know the difference, would not know the truth. The illness starts from, I would say, from day one. We don't say the truth about our enemies, as we never say the truth about our Nazi enemies. And we believe in New Germany. Did you hear this phrase? Germany is new. There is a new Germany. And Israelis believe that there is a new Germany. I never believed that there was a new Germany. I think that Nazism just moved to another form, to other forms, to the left, to the green, environmental activist. Nazism never left Germany.
It is a historical fact that the US government absorbed Nazi intelligence to create the CIA. This was documented by historian Christopher Simpson in 1988 in a very important book called Blowback, where with material that he obtained thanks to the Freedom of Information Act, he was able to show that all of Fremde Heer Oost, which was Adolf Hitler's intelligence infrastructure in Eastern Europe, was absorbed to create the CIA. And then in 1956, the CIA basically ordered the West German government, which was a puppet of the United States, they ordered the Konrad Adenauer government in West Germany to adopt the biggest chunk of that, which was the Gehlen organization in Munich, as the new Germany's intelligence service, the Bundesnachrichtendienst. So basically what the US bosses did was return the Nazis to power in Germany. So that agrees perfectly with your statement.
So in order to do that, they have to tell the public a lie, to tell the public a lie about the new Germany, to tell the Jewish public a lie about the Palestinians and the true purpose of the Palestinians. Let's exchange territory for peace and all these slogans that, all proven to be just a lie, a horrible lie.
They manage our reality, don't they? A little bit of time goes by, and then if you stop talking about a particular topic, just a few years later, nobody knows it even happened. Did you know that in 1968, there were student protests all over Germany, in all German universities, because the students were upset that the Nazis had been returned to power? That generation understood what was going on. But if you stop talking about this, you wait a few years, and in a little while, nobody knows it.
Yes, exactly. Because it's not written anywhere. It's documented, but it's hidden. And I think it's about time. And then what you get eventually is the Attorney General of the Army, Ifat Tomer Yerushalmi, blaming Jewish soldiers for being rapists. This is the result. This is the direct result of this twisted education. And
but
so
more, it seems to me that these people are not going to defend you. This kind of structure suggests to me that for Israeli Jews to defend themselves, they would first have to change their government. What do you think about that?
I think that we have to rewrite our history. That's what I've been doing as an historian. We have to look Satan in the eye. We have to admit that it was all part of I don't know if a plot or a conspiracy or just the way things turned to be. We have to start by telling the truth to ourselves. And I wrote in this article, in particular, something that, Francesco, is not, your point of interest, but it is mine, since I'm a scholar of theology. And it all starts with the Jews bringing to the world the idea that mankind was created in the image of God. And these non-believers, by destroying the bodies of the Jews, they are symbolically destroying the idea that all mankind was created in the image of God. So there is a theological root here. This is why I called it Satan. You don't have to believe that Satan really exists in the world in order to understand that this is a satanic kind of...
It sounds like you're saying that the thrust of the ideology that lies behind the mutilation of bodies, the torturing to death, the physical destruction of the victim, has to do with dehumanizing the victim. So if you see the victim as less than human, maybe as an animal, as an object, then that means that all moral restrictions are gone, and so they need to push this idea that we're not all made in the image of God, right? So the mutilation of the body is a way of kind of proving to yourself that, well, this was not a human anyway, so I have a right to do anything I want with this person.
I think you nailed it. That's exactly the point. And then I went back to the Quran, to the holy book of the Muslims, and you know that they copied many of the history of the Bnei Israel, the people of Israel, and the creation of the world by God and so on. But there is no mentioning in the Quran, correct me if I'm wrong, of mankind being created in the image of God. They never adopted this idea.
More Altshuler, thank you very much for sharing your views with us. I hope we can have you again for another chat.
Thank you very much. On behalf of our people.